Mike DeLisio from Stonemaier Games. Today I'm going to be doing a solo review of Tapestry by designer Jamie Stegmaier and publisher Stonemaier Games. I'm going to be focusing on the solo aspect of the game, and that was primarily designed by the Automa Factory with the lead designer Morten Monrad Petersen. Tapestry is a civilization game where you have to focus on two opponents in the AI here. You've got a primary opponent, which is the Automa, and a secondary opponent, which is the Shadow Empire. I want to give you a little brief overview of the game. I don't want to go into too much detail there, just to give you some context on how it plays, and then I'm going to come back here and give you my thoughts for how the game plays as a solo experience. So let's head on over to the table and take a look. Okay, I want to give a very, very brief overview of how the solo game of Tapestry works. If you'd like to see a complete solo session, please check out my video on the Dice Tower where I played through an entire solo game. There you'll really get an idea of how the game works, but just to give you a very, very high-level overview so you have a little bit of context when I'm bringing up some points in the review. Tapestry is basically a civilization game where you're going to be focusing primarily on advancing along four tracks. You've got the science track, the military track, the technology track, and the exploration track. All of these tracks will relate to a different aspect of the game where, for example, science is going to be one where oftentimes you're rolling the science die and potentially moving up these other tracks. So it's kind of representing that you are discovering new technologies and new discoveries. Military, as you might expect, is about putting influence out on the board, perhaps even toppling other opponents in a way to gain points and also to gain some other benefits that might come from cards or achievements. The technology track is really all about gaining these technology cards, placing them into your capital city. These give you benefits. They can be improved. These technologies can be upgraded and things along those lines. Some of these technologies can give you access to landmark buildings, which are these buildings that get placed onto your board. These large minis can get placed onto your board. They're called landmark buildings. You also have these income buildings that are on your income sheet that all get moved onto your individual capital city board. That's going to be a way to gain resources, to potentially gain points during the income turns. So as you're moving up these tracks, those are called advance turns, and those are the majority of turns you'll take in the game, is advancing on one of these four tracks by paying the appropriate resource or resources to do so. There are also, throughout the game, 5 income turns. Your first and last turn will always be an income turn, and your income turns are the way that you're going to gain resources, and it's also going to be your scoring rounds throughout the game. And so as you take more of these buildings off of your income board and place them onto your capital city, that's opening up more and more point scoring opportunities. It's also giving you access to more and more resources throughout the game. Now, when you're playing in a solo game, you are concentrating on kind of two opponents. One is your primary opponent and one is really a secondary opponent. In this case, the primary opponent I've got represented in yellow, that would be the Automa, and the secondary opponent would be in white here, which is the Shadow Empire. The way that the solo game works is that you've got here your basically Automa deck, your AI deck that you are going to use to determine what the actions they take. You're always going to turn over on the opponent's turn the top 2 cards, and you can put them in either orientation. This one could have gone in front of that one, doesn't matter. And you're looking at the left, or excuse me, at the centermost part of where these 2 cards meet. And they're going to tell you what these opponents are going to do. The top one is referring to your main opponent, the Automa, and it's going to determine which tracks you're advancing on. This is going to tell you what the order of operations are. It's called the tiebreaker card. This is called the track card. And so you would look at this and say, okay, well, the Automa this round is going to go for any valid track, and in this case, it's going to start from the top down and it's going to move up the science track and do the according action, the appropriate action. And then the Shadow Empire would do the opposite. It's going to go from the bottom up, and this little symbol denotes that it's going to move up its favorite track, which in this case is the science track, so it would move up. The difference being is that the Automa, in this case the yellow player, will be the only one that actually gains points and does actions. The Shadow Empire, really what it's doing is it is fighting for these landmark buildings to try to take them from you, because the AI can also get landmark buildings that go on its board, and it's also fighting for these 3 achievements, so it's a little bit of a race. The main opponent you have to worry about is the Automo opponent, and the Shadow Empire is there to really help ramp up the tension when it comes to gaining these landmark buildings and racing for those 3 achievements that are out there. There's a whole lot more to the game, of course, but that is the general idea in a game of Tapestry, where you are flipping over the top 2 cards of this deck. You're eventually going to be adding more cards. When they take their income turns, they're going to score points. You follow this little order of operations here. You will do what they say, move along the tracks. There are some other kind of icons you have to think about when you're getting into choosing what a valid hex is and what would be their priority. But for the most part, that's how the solo game plays. So let's head on over and give you my thoughts on Tapestry, the solo game. Okay, so hopefully that gave you just a bit of an idea on how the game plays. Please understand that I left out a huge portion of the game. I just wanted to give you some general flavor for how the game works so that you can have a little context when I discuss some of these items in the review. The first thing I want to do, with something that I think is very important in a solo game, is talk about the setup and the teardown of the game. Oftentimes that can really be the determiner whether I get a game off the shelf or not. Well, in Tapestry, there is a fair amount of setup and teardown that takes place, and as you probably got an indication from watching the little overview, it's because it's a large game. It's got a large footprint, and there's a fair number of components to manipulate and to take care of and to place in the correct spots at the beginning of the game. That being said, for the experience that the game provides, I don't feel like it's a disproportionate time for setup or teardown. Honestly, the lack of a tremendous amount of cards and the limited number of these tiles makes it pretty simple to get it out on the table and get ready to go. Honestly, the longest amount of time I think with setup is just placing out those landmarks on the correct spots, because I always want to make sure whether it really matters, and it kind of does, because the footprints of the buildings matter as far as making sure they go on the right ones. It takes me a little time sometimes to figure out, okay, am I putting the right building on the right spot, because I'm very careful to do that correctly, so that I know that if that landmark board says that this building takes up 9 spots on my capital city, that I've got the right one on there. So that being said, the amount of time taken is probably approximately 10 minutes for setup and teardown, and I think that that is perfectly reasonable for a game that provides the experience that this one does, that has so many moving parts involved. So overall, I'm very happy with the amount of time for setup and teardown. I don't feel like I'm spending more time setting it up and putting it away than I am actually playing the game. Next, art and components. Well, this is one that if you've seen any of my playthroughs or reviews before, you know that this is something that for me personally is very important. Board games are a tactile experience. You're manipulating physical components. I really treasure and value art and components that pull me in, that give me something that I feel good about looking at and moving around a board. And the art in this game by Andrew Bosley and the landmark sculpts by Ron Brown are, in my estimation, fantastic. I adore the art. I think it walks this lovely line of being somewhat whimsical, especially when you're talking about the tiles here. They don't go for a realistic view necessarily, but it's also not cartoony, and I think that that can be a really tricky line to walk sometimes, and I think they do a very good job of it here. It's whimsical, and it gives you this feeling of exploration and intrigue in some sense, depending on what the cards are, without being overbearing, either too cartoony or too serious. I really feel like it does a lovely job. I know that based on some early comments online and such, that these landmark building miniatures are a little bit controversial for a number of reasons. I personally find them wonderful. I am not a painter, okay? And so when I have access to pre-painted minis, me personally, that is a huge benefit. I know that for painters out there, maybe you like having unpainted minis, and I would never say that that is not a valid opinion. For me personally, I really love having these pre-painted minis. I feel like I've got a stunning looking game right out of the box with no extra work on my end, because quite honestly, I don't have the skills that are needed to get those painted, certainly not anywhere near the way these are painted. The overall look of the board, I think, is very good. The iconography is clear. It has a similar feel to other Stonemaier games I've played, where once you understand the main icons, other icons are kind of variations on that same theme. So for example, in the technology track, once you understand that that card icon represents the technology cards, the other icons that go along with it make sense. Same with the military, the exploration, the science. They all work off of a basic action for all four of those tracks, and the other icons are just kind of adjustments and changes to that. Also, there is actually two large player aids that some people might actually see as a bit of a negative, because these player aids are quite large. They are quite involved, these reference guides. There's a lot of information on these. Now, can that seem overwhelming? Sure, I think for the first game especially, it might seem overwhelming to a new player, but I honestly felt like there were very few times, even in my first game, certainly not by my second or third game, there were very few times that I had to reference that reference sheet. Didn't need to reference the reference sheet very much, and so to me, that's a testament to how clear the art and iconography is for the game. Now, moving on to the main meat of things, the overall solo experience. Well, I have made very clear in the past that I find the Automa system that has been developed throughout most, if not all, of the Stonemaier games to be a stellar example of how to handle an AI opponent. The earliest of the Automas were quite simple. I'm thinking specifically of Viticulture, where that being a worker placement game, really what the Automa did was just block spots. And even with that, it still felt like every time it was blocking a spot I wanted. And then as the games have gone on, they got a little bit more complex and able to do more things. So I'm thinking about Scythe, for example. The Scythe Automa had a relatively steep learning curve, and it really took a few games to feel comfortable with how that Automa worked. Then I recently actually played the Euphoria with the expansion that had a Automa deck added to that as well, and that used a 2-card Automa system. Tapestry uses something very similar to that, and I think it is brilliant. It is really, really clever. It's slick, and it doesn't take a lot of mental upkeep or administration for the solo player. And in a situation like this, where you actually have two opponents that you are controlling, the Automa that's going to be really racking up the points, and the Shadow Empire that's going to be racing you for those landmark buildings and for the achievements, to be able to administer the Automa's turn that quickly and that easily is really a feat. And it shows that the team, because the Automa Factory is a team, it shows that they have learned and they are iterating this process, and it just seems to get better and better and better. And I am consistently amazed by the amount of interactions that they can pull off with such a clear and simple rule set. Now, that being said, there is a learning curve. Make no mistake. This is a much more complex AI system than you'll find in many games. It's certainly more complex than Viticulture. However, I would say that this is less complex than Scythe, for example. Perhaps that's just the nature of the two games. The biggest aspect of learning that you would have for controlling the AI in Tapestry would involve placing out the tiles and finding the correct priority of tiles, where to place them. Sometimes you have to account for what is the favored track. If they have a military track that's favored, they're going to want to be more aggressive and place tiles closer to where you have your outposts. If the military track is not their favorite track, then they're going to want to avoid you. And have they conquered that central tile yet? If not, then you have to kind of change the priority. So there is a little bit of thought that goes into that. That is a little bit more of let me make sure I'm getting this right, and feeling like you have a real strong grasp of that system might take you two to three games. At least that was when I started feeling really comfortable with the Automa system. So overall, I absolutely adore the solo system in Tapestry. I think that to be able to pull off a game like this against an AI is a feat in and of itself. To be able to have a civilization game where you're not just trying to play for a high score, where you have a very aggressive and very difficult, I might add, very difficult AI opponent is a feat. Also, there is a very easy leveling system as far as difficulty. I've been playing on the normal mode, and that is a tremendous challenge. I have not beat the AI on normal mode in over 5 games. Now, I've gotten closer, I've gotten better, but I could go to the easy mode, but I've chosen to stay on the normal mode because I really like feeling that tension, that challenge. But if that gets frustrating to you, just know that there is an easy mode, and if you find that the normal is too easy after time, ramp it up to the more difficult mode. So that is tremendous. The last thing that I wanted to mention is I suppose an argument that I've seen, not just with Tapestry, but with other civilization-themed games. And that is this idea of, is this truly a civilization game? This is obviously a contentious topic, and I say obviously because I've seen so many people passionately arguing for one game being a true Civ game over another. So, for example, Seven Wonders. Is Seven Wonders a civilization game, or is it a drafting game with a civilization theme? Well, my opinion is that it's the latter. It's primarily a drafting game that has a lovely civilization theme on top of it. Is Tapestry another one of those games? My opinion is absolutely not. It's a true civilization game. However, I do want to state this. It is a civilization game that really skews, in my opinion, towards Euro players. It has Euro mechanics. What does that mean? It means that this is a civilization game that plays quickly. For me, that's a huge benefit. Even in a multiplayer game, a 5-player game, you can get a game of Tapestry played in 2 hours. I know because I've done it. Now, to be able to do that, there is going to be some abstraction going on. So, for me personally, it's this question. Am I willing to trade a little bit of workload as a player to get the theme and trade that for 2 to 3 hours of game time? My answer is 100% every time yes. I will always take a little bit of abstraction if it's saving me 2 hours of game time. Now, I know that that's a personal thing, and that there are many people that love these epic 4, 5, 6 hour games where the theme is imbued through every mechanism. And that's fine. But that's not my style. And so, for me, I am okay with saying, okay, I'm moving this cube up this track, and that denotes that I have discovered the technology to produce cars. That is fine with me. I'll do a little bit of heavy lifting as a gamer to inject that theme. The framework is here. The art and the technology cards and the framework for a thematic civilization game is here. Do you have to do a little bit of lifting as a gamer to imbue that theme? Yes, but again, the payoff in my mind is that you're getting a civilization game playable as a solo game in an hour, almost every time, and in a multiplayer game, 2.5 hours, depending on the player count. So I just wanted to get that out there because I know that there has been a lot of talk about whether one game is a civilization game or not. So overall, Tapestry as a solo experience, I think, is tremendous. The setup and teardown is very proportionate to the amount of game that you get out of it. I don't feel like it's so much that I don't want to get it off the shelf. The art and the components, I feel, are lovely. They are not only wonderful to look at, hold, manipulate, move around the board, but they have clear iconography, and I never felt like I was struggling to figure out what something did. And the overall gameplay experience that is provided by the Automa is tremendous. Tension, challenge, but very low upkeep, and a slight learning curve that really pays off in the end. So, all told, For me, the solo experience of Tapestry earns the seal of excellence. I am blown away by how the Automa Factory just seems to get better and better, and I can't wait to see what they come up with next. So, as always, I thank you so much for your time, and have a great day.
Thanks so much for watching another Dice Tower video. If you enjoy our videos, subscribe to the channel for more fun, comprehensive board game coverage. Also, consider joining us at one of our events. Come to Dice Tower Retreat, a small, intimate gathering where gaming is king. Join us for Dice Tower Cruise, the largest board game cruise. Attend Dice Tower West in Las Vegas, for gaming fun on the West Coast, or Dice Tower East in Orlando, in sunny Florida. Dice Tower Conventions, the friendliest gaming conventions on Earth. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.